Hello everyone, I am Daniele Forni, the Data Shaman. I am an executive coach, and this podcast is where coaching, mentoring, corporate life, philosophy, psychology, and a bit of chaos all come together. In each episode, we dive into the questions that shape our work, our leadership, and the way we show up to the world. Welcome to the Sage and the CEO. In today's episode is part of the series Coaching Journeys, Conversation from Cambridge, where I interview my classmates about the journey into coaching, what motivates them, and their leadership advice. I am sure you do not want to miss this one.
Welcome everyone. This is the Coaching Journeys, Conversations from Cambridge. And I have here with me Michael Baptista. Hopefully I pronounced the name correct. Please do let me know. And let's start with a bit of an introduction. Can you share a little bit about your background and what brought you to this program?
Sure. Well, as you know, I'm on the same program as you at Cambridge, the Advanced Executive Coaching Program. I grew up in London. I studied at Oxford. In the 80s, I entered the world of investment banking, which was growing explosively. And at the time, it was a period of globalization. After some years in London, I was lucky enough to be in Asia for 8 years, much of it in Hong Kong, a bit of it in Tokyo, when China was going through, India to an extent, to a great extent actually, but China to an even more dramatic extent was going through huge changes that we're still seeing the effects of today. And to have a ringside seat of that was really a privilege. It was fascinating. Came back to London. I left a large bank. I started my own business as a founder, which was in something completely new area to me, venture capital, investing in fintech companies in the UK. And that's gone well. And then now I'm in the process of moving to executive coaching. So that's hopefully that wasn't too long.
Oh, absolutely not. What made you think that executive coaching, after such a successful career, was the right step for you?
I mean, a few things. I think I'd looked at it before and decided it wasn't for me. Over many years, but particularly as an investor in these last few years, I became more and more aware of the cost, the financial cost in terms of returns to an investor, but also the human cost of issues around human capital, of people issues with senior executives, with founders in the boardrooms, startups and scale-ups and in large companies, was a huge cost and presented a real opportunity, and that there was a sort of fit. For me, executive coaching is very broad. It's now, I think anybody can call themselves a coach, and executive coaching seems to apply to multiple areas. But I saw that there was, well, in fact, I don't think I've ever met anyone in coaching with my background. And so I thought there was a fit. I had been lucky enough to be coached twice in my career by superb coaches who, without wanting to descend to cliches, were transformational for me. It was something I enjoyed, being coached. I'd done a couple of coaching courses and I really loved the whole interaction. And so it brought together something that I enjoyed, where I thought I could add value, very important to my personal framework. And where I thought I could make a good living, which people often don't talk about, but it is a business, and I thought there was a niche there.
Oh, that is very interesting. Actually, yesterday with Michael Forman and also with myself, I also had this experience of working with a coach, and I found the experience extremely, as you said, transformational, but really help you change your perspective, help you make, I guess, better decision for yourself.
Yes.
The role that you had,
Yes.
that need sometimes.
Yes. I mean, both times I received coaching were when I was working in very large banks, and they were organized by those banks, and clearly there was an interest in helping me to manage better, and I think they did, but the coaching was transformational at a personal level, and a few of the things that we did, said, learned in those sessions have stayed with me for decades. And I think that makes it unusual and highly valuable as an experience, I think.
I completely agree. I have a question to ask you because, as you said, you have such a interesting background, and as you said, there are not many coaches with your background. From your point of view, and when I say point of view, from your, let's say, leading companies or advising company with your experience in banking, when you look at leaders in organizations today, what are the, let's say, the common issues or challenging, and how can coaching maybe help uh, fix these challenges?
So I'm a bit I mean, if you're an investor, especially if you're a venture capital investor, you either have to be at the beginning or you have to become a bit of a skeptic. And so I'm a little bit skeptical of the way that the coaching world, at least if you read the literature and listen to many coaches on podcasts, and it's a very large online world now, is trying to carve out for itself a role in which coaching is somehow the answer and leadership is the problem. I'm not sure. I'm not sure that there is one answer. I mean, if you're running JP Morgan and you're running a local shop and you're running a production facility in China and you're the vice chancellor of a university in the UK that has funding problems, those are all very different. I don't know that there's something called leadership where there's one lesson for all those people because of the times we live in. And actually, when people talk about the times we live in, so everyone will talk about AI, but they often miss, I think, some of the really transformational things happening. For example, it seems to me that we are unarguably in the middle of a huge change from a written to an oral culture. And this is an enormous, if you look at social media, if you look at people's attention spans, if you look at the ability and the interest in reading, if you look at what persuades people, the kinds of politicians they vote for, any analysis of, for example, US presidential speeches will show you that Abraham Lincoln was using a high school and beyond language to talk to a nation where most people didn't go to high school, and we're now, I think, at fourth grade, maybe. And you know, a lot of people think that it's only the other party, but this is across both parties. So that if you're leading a large group of people and you're moving into an oral culture, that changes a lot about how you communicate, how you stand out. People are more tribal nowadays, but that may not change very much for you if you're running a smaller group. I also think my own focus is, I think there is a kind of crisis in our age, I'm not sure the answer is leadership, but it might be something like management of the self. So we find ourselves bombarded, don't we, by stimuli. The internet, social media, a lot of short-term dopamine There is content. There is an endless stream of content. It's streaming. You see that international sports has become the slave of television. Everything is content. The internet has largely become television. The internet, which was really a kind of nerdy thing, and people were connecting to one another, and a lot of it was reading, talking. The internet has become short form videos. And so how you curate, how you manage your attention, how you curate those inputs, how you manage to not be overwhelmed by the sheer volume, the constant hysteria, because everything is at volume level 10. I mean, I think there are a lot of people who are very anxious in our world because some of the news is alarming, but also the way it's reported, the way it's never turned off. There's no nuance anymore. How you manage your attention, what you choose to prioritize, how you remain effective. You used a really important word earlier, which is making decisions. You said coaching helped you make that. And as well as the banking and investment banking and venture capital, I became fascinated as an adult in philosophy, and eventually I bit the bullet and I did a philosophy degree, and then I learned Greek so I could do, and I think a lot of philosophy is a fantastic intellectual exercise, but has not really got great lessons to take away. But someone who I definitely found hugely worth engaging with, and still am, and someone I think who has something to say to us, is Aristotle. And for Aristotle, hello?
Michael, apologies. I think the podcast will have recorded it, but I lost it because I couldn't.
Okay.
There was like a break.
Okay.
Sorry, apologies. I'll let me ask you a question so that we will
Sure.
then link it up together. So you studied philosophy.
Yes, I had always had an interest, and then I studied it formally. And linking back to something you said that I think is really important, decisions. You said your decision-making got better. Aristotle thought that a good life was distinguished by a long-term pattern of good decision-making. And I think good decision-making is harder and harder if you are being constantly bombarded by things that really only want to grab your attention.
I have a question, but it's connected to the internet and modern culture. It seems that Stoicism is becoming mainstream.
Yes.
Marcus Aurelius, everyone is reading Seneca. And those are really talking about delayed gratification and focusing on learning, focusing on self-awareness. Do you think, apart from Stoicism, are there other past philosophies that might actually help us today in dealing with this continuous being, as you said, bombarded with dopamine, sort of like reactant?
As I said, I think Aristotle is a great place to go for balance, and I think Aristotle's life has some lessons. You know that he had to flee Athens at one point because of the danger that he would be executed by the mob. But it's Aristotle's range of interests. So at the time that he was working, there was really not a great, really scientific tradition. And science, as you know, builds on itself. People stand, I think it was Isaac Newton who said he stood on the shoulders of giants before him. And Aristotle really didn't have any shoulders to stand on. He more or less invented what would become biology. So he had a huge range of interests. And I think one way to stay sane in this world that we're in with the dopamine hits you talked about is to have your own interests. One of the amazing things about the internet, for those of us who are old enough who can remember when it started, is that rather than allowing people to be more individual, it has made a lot of people more tribal and more like one another. People are not. There are, of course, people who use it to express themselves, but actually it seems largely to be used to join up. Maybe it's because I'm not sure how much I believe in really delayed gratification. I'm a great believer in gratification, but I'm a bit skeptical because the Stoics were highly suspicious of emotion. So a real Stoic would say that if something terrible happened to a family member, then your grief was irrational and therefore you shouldn't really indulge in it. It's not a million miles away from from Buddhism, which is, where the idea is that attachment is the root of suffering, and therefore, and I find, and I've read around and been fascinated by Buddhism for decades, but I find that belief, which is core to it, actually nonsense. I have a daughter, and if someone tells me that if something happens to her, then ideally I should not suffer because I should not be attached. I find that nonsense. It makes me less human. And actually, I think strictly Stoicism and Buddhism would say that whilst it's understandable that you suffer, really, if you are an ideal Stoic or an ideal Buddhist, you need to be beyond that because you achieve a kind of purely rational detachment. And if I can name one other philosopher, David Hume, who has been a little bit cancelled in recent years, but Hume was in sort of the 2,500 years or so of philosophy before Hume wrote. Hume was probably the first philosopher to give a major role to the emotions. And he even said that it's our emotions that create all of our impulses to act. And that actually reason is something that is either about completely self-contained patterns like mathematics, in his view, or it's instrumental. It's about, an emotion tells me that I have a desire to go to Hong Kong, or I fall in love, or I want to get a job as a pilot or something. That impulse contains a feeling, which at some level is not questionable. It's not irrational. It's I want X, and then reason is about how you do X. And so I think Hume has a lot to teach us, and as does Aristotle, about the balance between reason and emotion, and therefore good decision making. The fashion for the Stoics, I mean, it's very male. You have Marcus Aurelius sitting on his horse, looking as though he can, get through anything. But actually, is that a great way to live? I'm skeptical.
I'm so fascinated by this because I don't have I studied philosophy back in high school, but I always kept on reading. Let me ask you something.
I know that you have a great knowledge of Asian philosophy. Actually, we came out on the course, which was very, and the points you raised on it, I thought were really, really interesting.
Thank you. But I have a question about somebody that probably wouldn't call about Asian, but Jordan Peterson.
Yes.
I just want to know like your views, because again, connecting it to coaching, often he is there is a certain kind of like subset, if you will, of the internet society or society that actually sees him as a very good coach and a very good motivator, a very person that can transform you. And I'm just curious to know, like, what your thoughts are.
I mean, I think there are at least two Jordan Petersons. So one Jordan Peterson, I think, reached out to young men who, at a time when young men were being told that masculinity is toxic, as though there were no other way to be a man, and perhaps gave them a voice and suggested that discipline and self-fashioning was a way forward, and they were valuable in themselves, and that seems fine. There's another bit of Jordan Peterson, and you remember he was a Canadian academic, which is someone who writes gibberish. I don't know if you've a lot of people talk about him. His books are unreadable.
Some of the books, some of them are more readable than others. That's what they will.
Yeah. And so there's a lot of nonsense. And the third Jordan Peterson, I would say, who's the more recent one, is sad, I think. He obviously became a huge internet personality, and you will find easily now videos of him online where he refuses to argue his point and seems almost offended if he's asked to explain or defend anything. There's a particularly famous video that went viral where I think it was a student questioning him, and he virtually broke down and certainly was unwilling and actually seemed unable to explain himself. And that I think is, so I think he had his time, and I think there was a group for whom he did valuable things that was being neglected. I mean, that's another thing. The mainstream culture, which has become very much about group identities, seems always to be prioritizing one group at the expense of another, rather than actually emphasizing what it is about all of us as individuals rather than members of a group that is valuable.
I guess as we're reaching towards the end of this conversation, I have a couple of questions that hopefully they're not too personal, but is there something, if you were to meet a young person, what would you advise him to do, or what kind of suggestion would you tell him or her?
I mean, I would say what I told my daughter when she was very young. I would say everybody's going to lie to you about sex, about money, about power. The one thing that you need to remember, the one thing that is absolute, is that your time is short and is uncertain, and that you need to make the most of it. Everything else is details.
That is very profound. I cannot help but, again, being humbled a bit by your own experience.
Oh.
Any regrets or things that you would have done differently in the past?
Yeah, I wouldn't have wasted so much time. I mean, so we were immigrants and came to London. It was very hard in the 70s. I went to a state school. The teachers were great. I got to Oxford and I completely wasted my time. I spent 3 years having fun and drinking, and I got a 2-1 because I could, but I learned nothing. And if I look back, the things I regret, there are things that you do that you regret. It's not true that you never regret stuff you do, but it's mainly the time that which is so precious, is that I haven't done more.
That is very interesting, because now in my mind, because you mentioned Aristotle, I cannot not think about Diogenes.
Right.
He's a bit the opposite. So,
Yes.
if I may say, like, you moved from a Diogenes kind of life to then a more Aristotelian.
Yes. Well, I've always been a bit torn between the two, to be honest. Yes. Yes.
I guess it's important to us to have a balance. There is a time for everything, but as you said, it's about not feeling like the time has been wasted. Okay.
Yeah, I think that's and actually, if we want to end on a coaching note, one of the greatest things that I got when I was being coached, because I mean, I probably seem quite calm, but I think I can be quite an extreme character. And one of my coaches, it was a woman. She said to me, "Some people find their balance by being in the middle, Michael," she said. "And some people," she said, "like you, find their balance by being on both ends, both extremes." And that was really helpful for me because, yeah, Diogenes, Aristotle, and in a lot of ways, I like really quite opposite things, and I do them both or live them both. And for the first time when she said that, I thought, actually, that's okay. There is a kind of balance in I loved, I grew up during punk rock, and I loved it, and I still do, and I like Gregorian chant, and I think that's fine. It's okay.
That's very interesting. So, Michael, thank you very much for this conversation. It's been absolutely a pleasure, and looking forward to meeting you again in Jan.
Thank you for the invitation. It was great to talk. See you in January. Take care.